Good morning, all. My name is Thabang Audat. I'm from the Department of Energy from the South African government. My presentation is mainly will be mainly on the IPP program that since August of 2011 we have introduced as an alternative to a situation where Eskom would be the sole generator of electricity. So I will go through some of the very important learning points for us as government, for the private sector, those that are involved in this power generation. And I will also touch on the future IPP programs that we are still going to roll out from government side. The starting point is that as we currently in South Africa, we have a 20-year policy position in relation to the new power stations that we intend to bring on board. Those are familiar with the South African electricity supply industry will know that we currently have Eskom being about 97% power generator. And of that 97%, about 90% is predominantly from coal converted to electricity. So the policy position seeks to change all of that. The intention is to change it from a technology perspective. In other words, we want to move away from being a coal-dominated electricity generation industry to the one where there is a fair amount of non-coal technologies introduced in the mix. So the table that is projected on the screen displays the options, the new build options. In other words, starting from year 2010, so the first column, it's the COD date in terms of the years. So it's a 20-year plan starting from 2010 right through to 2030. The first row on the top indicates the types of technologies that we want to introduce in the South Africa's power generation sector. My focus for this morning's presentation will be on what we have introduced, in other words, what we have signed with the private sector to date. And you will notice that the focus is mainly on the last three columns, in other words, on the renewable technologies, that being wind, concentrating solar power, as well as solar photovoltaic. But this table shows you the 20-year picture of where South Africa is going. I'm not going to talk much on the details. I'll just pick on key columns to notice. The first one being nuclear. We intend to have 9,600 additional nuclear being converted to electricity. So over and above what we currently have 1,800 electricity generated from nuclear as a fuel. So over and above that, we want to introduce 9,600 within the next, it's now 18 years, but in 2010 it was a 20-year plan. So that's the first one that I want to highlight from this presentation. Then the second that I want to highlight is the last three columns. The wind concentrating solar power, it's termed CSP there, as well as solar PV. All of those combined, you see it's 8,400 for wind, 1,000 for CSP, and 8,400 for solar PV. So all of those combines amounts to about 43% of our electricity generation going into the future will come from renewable based technologies. If I can have the next slide, please. So that previous table now summarized in terms of technology and the percentage contribution for the next 20 years. As I indicated, the renewables will contribute 42%, right? So in the next 20 years, 42% of our new build generators will be renewable resources. The nuclear one, that red bar chart, red bar, 23% going forward. So for the purpose of today's presentation, I'll be focusing on the 42% share because this is the program that we have started. In relation to the other technologies, we have started a legal process to procure the other technologies, but the actual program has not started. In other words, we have not issued procurement documents to the market yet, but there is work ongoing in preparing the procurement documents for this. In relation to that, the procurement documents were issued in August of 2011. And that's the experience that I want to share in today's presentation. But I thought, it's better to have a global perspective, a bigger picture, before I zoom into our experience in relation to that. So it's this slide, it's quite, has a lot of detail. What I will try to do is to summarize it without necessarily going line for line. As I mentioned, this is based on the procurement IPP program that we have launched. IPP, Independent Power Producers Program. We are moving away from where you have ESCOM being the generator to where you have independent power producers. In other words, where you have private sector now investing in power generation within the South African borders. On the 3rd of August, we launched the procurement documents. The focus of these documents was only on the renewable technologies, that 42% that I mentioned. Shortly thereafter, we had a compulsory briefing session. Very, very important. Those companies that could not attend that briefing session can still participate. In other words, although it was compulsory, it was only compulsory for the first 2 windows, and those windows have passed. So now we're rolling out more megawatts, and everyone can participate. You don't have to have registered on that date for you to take part in this. So initially, we had, of that 42%, we had announced that about 3,700 megawatts as a starting program would be procured. And our intention was that we would have 5 separate windows, if you like. The whole idea was we didn't want, from the word go, we didn't want to have all of that taken up. We wanted to spread it into 5 different windows, so that from window 1, the lessons that you learned from a procurement perspective, you could then incorporate into the subsequent windows to improve the program. So, and the idea was that if there's megawatts available, then we roll it over to the next window until you consume all of that. So to date, we have gone through bid window 1 up to construction start, right? Bid window 2, we have shortlisted certain companies as preferred bidders, but construction is yet to start. So from bid window 1, 1,400 megawatts was allocated, mainly on wind and solar photovoltaic. Both of them combined, they accounted for 80% of this 1,400, and the rest was on the solar CSP. There are other technologies that we had introduced, but the uptake for those additional technologies was not that high. So in relation to bid window 1, 28 projects were shortlisted bidder status in December 2011. So we launched in August 2011. By December 2011, we had selected 28 projects as preferred bidder. It took us almost 10 months between the point where we announced that 28 companies have been selected to start finalizing their documents to a point where they could be able to secure financing from the market to a point where they would then be ready to start construction. And the reason for this, without going into too much detail, this was the first large-scale IPP program in South Africa. So from the government side, certain systems needed to be set in place. I mean, new committees had to be established, and it was a learning curve, basically. That's why the time is that long. However, this is not, it doesn't mean this is the acceptable waiting period, if you like, between preferred bidder and financial close. On Eskom side, because Eskom is the counterparty to a power purchase agreement, as well, it was the first independent power producers of this magnitude, of the scale. So they also had to set up certain structures internally. So the result of that was there was about 10-month delay between preferred bidder status to where the project reaches financial close. A month after financial close, we then signed the power purchase agreement and the implementation agreement. So the projects were now ready for construction. Construction started in most of them in January of this year. Right? So if you go to various sites that have been allocated, you'll see there's activity already. Those that watched the news, not yesterday, day before, the 7 o'clock news, you would see that about 66 wind turbines were delivered last week Friday already. So bid window 1, construction has started. 1,416 megawatts construction has started. Bid window 2, to date we have shortlisted 19 projects. We expect them to finalize their financial arrangement by end of this month. Right? Shortly thereafter, then we have PPA signature, and the construction is expected to start in June of this year. So the experience that we have is based on these 2 windows, right? And that is what I'm going to share in my presentation. Quickly, without going into too much detail, the procurement process was designed to be in 3 parts, right? The first part of the request for proposal, there were certain requirements, actually document requirements that the bidders had to comply with. For example, you had to submit all your tax clearance, you had to submit all your registration documents, your site has to be selected. And we had put in place minimum rules that needed to be complied with. So that was our first point of check. So you come with your box, with all your files in it, and we check for these 2 elements in the first instance. If all is well here, then your box will go through to what we refer to as a qualification stage. Herein now we go into the detail of each submission. We would look at issues such as your environmental approval. Have you done all the necessary environmental approvals for a specific site, as well as for your transportation for these turbines, if you're using wind, for example? Your land agreement. Do you have a piece of land that the project will be based on? Is there agreement between, if you're not the owner of the land, do you have a lease agreement? If you are the owner, do you have title deed for the land? So all of those will check in that. Economic development, Economic development, this by and large relates to the fact that we had made it a requirement that we don't want international companies coming to South Africa and bidding alone without having a local content as part of their structure in the company. And we're not only referring to, getting some guys to do manual labor during construction. In the company structure itself, we had to reserve some shares for the local companies. Your financial arrangements, have you submitted the finance model as required? Do you indicate all your costs? Is the tariff acceptable for us? So all of that would be in your financial model. And we wanted to be able to audit that model. It's not that you create the model and put it in a PDF format and include it in your file. We wanted electronic version, Excel, so that our financial guys could interrogate that model that was submitted. Your proposal, does it make technical sense? Do you have all the necessary approvals? If it's if it's SABS compliant, in the first instance, the SABS was not a key requirement because we acknowledge that some of these technologies, actually majority of them, would be imported from abroad. But there are also other international standard bodies that you had to comply with. So all of that would fall under technical. Your price, our approach was we set a price cap. So we didn't prescribe a tariff. It was not a feed-in tariff approach. We set a price cap, and we said to the potential bidders, you compete underneath that. We have a price ceiling, so competition will happen below the ceiling. So obviously, if you're above ceiling, you would not meet our requirements. Automatically, your submission gets thrown out. As well as the capacity, we had specified minimum in terms of the generation capacity at each site. We had specified that, for example, a solar PV, minimum 5 megawatts. Do you comply with that? So that was in terms of Part B of our test. Now, the difference between Part B and C, you will see that some of the items are repeated in Part C. We only considered this evaluation, this Part C evaluation, only if there was an oversubscription from Part B. In other words, if we indicated that for this window, we want to procure, all in all, we want to procure 1,000 megawatts. If we have bids, all of them complying with this, and the total is 1,200 megawatts, then we have an oversubscription of qualifying bids. Then we'd go to Part C. When we get to Part C, this is where you compete. We call it a comparative evaluation. So if you are a wind bidder, we would compare your submission with another wind company. And obviously, we will take the best value for us. The submission that will demonstrate better value for us would be the one that goes through. Window 1, we didn't get to this stage. So those that complied, we didn't have an oversubscription. So evaluation in Window 1 ended there. Window 2, some technologies were subjected to Part C because now the market was now, being more competitive. Almost all of them were complying with Part B, so it was easy to comply with Part B. So that's why now we had an oversubscription in Window 2, and we subjected some of the technologies to a comparative evaluation. So now there is a window that is closing in August of this year. Bid submission date closes August of this year. Our expectation is that there will even be more bids that will be subjected to Part C because the market is now maturing and they are understanding the bid documents better. In terms of the parties that will enter into a contract, I just want to go through this. Yeah. So we have 3 main parties. We have the independent power producer, at your IPPs. And within here, obviously, you'll have different structures. So all the technologies, being it wind, solar, landfill gas, biomass, different structures, all of them, they fall within that category of IPPs. The second key stakeholder is the utility, the state utility ESCOM. The third one, obviously, is the program champion, which is the RSA government. In terms of the contractual relationship, the IPP will enter into a power purchase agreement with the state utility. This is very important document for the IPP because it defines the revenue flow for the 20-year period. If, for example, your plant is a 20-year plant, this document here defines and makes provision, legal provisions of how your revenue will flow and what are the legal responsibilities on both parties. So all of that is governed by this document. During construction, in other words, for the first 12 to 18 months, depending on the technology, you enter as an IPP, you enter into an agreement with the RSA government. This is where we monitor all your commitments, because when you bid, you say to us, for example, here are my local partners, this is the role that they will play, both during construction and operation. If you're saying you're going to appoint 100 people on your site for the construction phase, all of that is documented in there. If you're saying you're going to comply with our environmental laws during construction, all of that is documented in there. So this is the second most important document for the IPP. There are other documents that I'm not showing, for example, your grid connection, your lease agreement with the landlord, but those are, in terms of the importance, those for me are less important. The power purchase agreement, we have a third line linking the power purchase agreement, and that's the government support framework. To explain it shortly, should Eskom default, in other words, where the buyer is defaulting and they are not able to pay for whatever reason, that this power purchase agreement is guaranteed by the state. So if Eskom is not able to pay, the state will step in and pay. It was a very important arrangement because it meant that the lenders for the IPP could derive some comfort that the power purchase agreement will be respected until, if it's a 20-year, until the last day of that 20. So there was an agreement between us and our state utility, which we refer to as a government support framework. But essentially it means, if Eskom is not able to pay, then government will step in. And how we step in is defined in that support framework. Behind the Department of Energy, there's a National Treasury there, GCC, government, basically it issues guarantees. So any program that government will run that requires guarantees, financial guarantees, National Treasury will step in. So in this case, National Treasury is behind this and they've provided guarantees, which essentially guarantees the PPA for its lifetime. Another link is that the IPPs, most of them, there are some that have financed their project from their corporate balance sheet. But most of them, their financing is project finance. Therefore, you get banks, local banks and international banks, financing this SPV for the sole purpose of generating power and getting revenues through the power purchase agreement. We have also development finance institutes, both in South Africa, your DBSA, your IDC, and abroad, that are also providing part of finance. To mention that most of the DFIs will finance the South African part of the shareholders. So if, for example, your South African company has a 27% stake in the IPP, that 27% stake is not a free carrier. It also needs to be financed on its own. So the DFIs, because they provide softer loans, will finance that 27% stake. So this is the contractual arrangement in summary. Obviously, there are a lot of details behind it, but for the purpose of the presentation, that's what I wanted to share. In terms of the numbers, the 28 projects from bid window 1, because they had submitted all their models, financial models and all, they indicated that about 47 billion, now this is all of them combined, that is capital expenditure for that amount of megawatts. Some of it will be spent in RSA, and some obviously abroad, wherever the equipment is imported from. RSA portion, if you add that, is about 17.5 billion. So you have about 30 billion, for example, from window one that will be spent elsewhere outside South Africa. When we designed the program, we acknowledged that initially this would be the issue because we don't have local manufacturing of these, being it solar panels or being it wind turbines. Majority of them would be imported from abroad, and therefore this picture was not a surprise for us. Bid window two, capital expense is expected to be 28 billion, and this is the South African spend, about 15.5. So you can see that percentage-wise, the picture is improving. And that's the whole idea, that as we localize, as we establish local factories in South Africa, this number should change. The percentage of how much of that is spent locally should go up as we go to the subsequent windows. As I indicated, that our model was the one where we set a ceiling. So we set a tariff ceiling or a price cap, if you like. This is rand per megawatt hour. It's not showing there fully. Round one, this was the average bid submission. This is not the average price, and it's important to notice the difference. This is not the average procured price. But when you look at all the projects that submitted to us, this is the average bid submission. The average procured price, we wouldn't want to disclose it at this stage to the market. But this is the average bid submission date. Round one, across these technologies. Round two, bid window two, you'd see that the price is lowering. The cap stays the same, but the price is, so there's more competition because the guys are now realizing that, for them to be competitive, they must also control their cost. They must negotiate strongly with their EPCs, with their lenders, so that they control their cost. This is the difference between the first two windows in terms of price differential. Small hydro, we didn't procure, we didn't shortlist, but the same guy submitted again for the two windows. So there's not much market information from there because it's one or two companies. But when you look at solar PV, look at that 25% difference between window one and window two. Onshore wind, about 11%, and CSP 6.5%. So it demonstrates that, as you go through procurement for the subsequent windows, your price is coming down. But price is not the only thing that we are looking at or that we look at during our evaluation. So for the first window and for the second window, these are remember I indicated that 1,416 was procured from window, and this is the split across these technologies. And for window two, that's the split across the various technology that was allocated. From where we're standing, if you look at South Africa, there are two actually key renewable sources, and that's wind and the solar PV. By the way, this information is available. It's a public information. So you can get access to a wind map, right, for you to be able to see where are the wind resources, which site in terms of the piece of land, if you are a wind developer. If you are a solar developer, same. You can get a map as to where is the best solar radiation for your projects. We also have gas, albeit not fully developed yet. The main one there is around the Karoo, the shale gas, that government has started process to explore. There's some pockets of gas on the west coast, right? As well as importation of gas from Mozambique on the east side. You will see towards the end of my presentation, obviously there is coal as well, which is currently 90% of our electricity comes from that. You will see at the end of my presentation that we intend to procure all of these technologies going forward. So it's for the developers then to go to these respective sites and do the necessary environmental work in preparation to respond to our request. Based on the renewable energy program, right? These are the applications. So you can see the concentration, it's around there in the center. The generation license applications that were sent to the regulator by private developers. So you can see where most guys want to develop renewables. Because, license application, you must indicate the location. So this data based on window 1 and window 2, this is the geographic spread of where these projects will be located. This is my last slide. So I have shared some of the experiences that we learned during bid window 1 and 2. Now this slide elaborates what are the programs going forward that the South African government has started. Bid window 3, so from that 3,700 megawatts that in August of 2011 we indicated we want to procure, there's about 1,100 megawatts still left. To date, we have done bid window 1 and bid window 2. Bid window 3, it's still open. The bid submission date is August of this year. So that will complete the first program, the 3,700 megawatts. We have also started a legal process to procure additional megawatts. So in other words, over and above the 3,700 megawatts. On the 19th of December last year, that GG number is a government gazette number. So if you capture that and you go to the government printers, you'll be able to get the full document which details these numbers. It's a legal process. It's a Section 34 of the Electricity Regulation Act, but I don't want to bore you with the process and how we get to that. What is important for this presentation is that on the 19th of December, that government gazette document indicated that we are starting a process to procure that. Right? We want to procure additional to 3,700 megawatts, further 3,200 megawatts of renewable energy. Right? However, we do recognize, as all the technical guys in this room will know, that renewable energy cannot provide base load yet, right? Because it's only available when the sun shines or when the wind blows. So you also need for this presentation is that on the 19th of December, that government gazette document indicated that we are starting a process to procure that. Right? We want to procure additional to 3,700 megawatts, further 3,200 megawatts of renewable energy. Right? However, we do recognize, as all the technical guys in this room will know, that renewable energy cannot provide base load yet, right? Because it's only available when the sun shines or when the wind blows. So you also need a base load for your economy to grow. South African industry is energy intensive. We have mines that are consuming energy like there's no tomorrow. So we want to procure a base load from independent power producers, not from Eskom as in the past. And the base load is spread into 3 technologies. Coal, 2,500. Natural gas, can be LNG, 2,600. And hydro, 2,600 as well. So these are long-term in nature. In other words, you find that especially the base load will take about 5-6 years to construct. In the medium term, whilst we are waiting for the base load to come on board, we have also indicated a total of 1,200 megawatts to come both from industrial cogeneration, in other words, your paper manufacturers, your sugar farmers, whatever the heat that they normally release to the atmosphere, we are providing an opportunity for them to convert that heat into electricity and sell back to the grid. as well as the short term. The difference between this one and that one is that the COD date for this must be in line with the definition of medium term. So in other words, COD by 2020. We have only issued that document detailing exactly what all of this entails. The procurement documents, our intention is to issue them in the third quarter of this year. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's the content of my presentation. Thank you.